Delighted to welcome everybody to today's reading for Enclave 2, coordinated by Charles Alexander, David Weiss, and me, Tenny Nathanson. The first Enclave series was conceived and curated by Ray Armantrout and Gene Huving, and we're honored that Tucson gets to carry the project forward for a while. There are 2 more readings in this series, after which we'll take a break of several weeks, then be back at it for one more round. Next week's reader is Alice Notley, brought to you direct from Paris, and at noon Pacific Arizona time, not our usual 1 p.m. to accommodate the big time difference. The following week, Myung-Mi Kim will read back at our usual 1 p.m. start time. If you missed any of our earlier readings, or if you'd like to hear them again, they're archived on the Chax Press YouTube channel. I think Charles is going to put the URL in the chat at some point. Thanks for joining us, and here's Charles Alexander to introduce Will Alexander.
Thank you, Tenny, and thank you, everyone, for coming. Before I introduce Will, I just wanted to have maybe 5 seconds of silence to register the passing of the writer, teacher, novelist, poet, and music aficionado, Al Young, a couple of days ago. And Al taught the first creative writing class I ever stayed in and didn't run away from. I did run away from one before that. But, so just a moment. Thank you. So poet, essay, novelist, short fiction writer, playwright, aphorist, visual artist, pianist, who has written close to 40 books in the above genres. Will Alexander is the poet in residence at Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Foundation in Venice, California. He currently lives in Los Angeles. The community, the communal, associates the whole with the part. Wherever I am present, all members of my community are present. Borders break down. Plinths are not the only possibility for support of the statues, which are not bound by the weight of their materials. While airy sprites might descend to hand us speech, we ascend and sprinkle the elements of speech throughout the world, from Dogon to Andalusia, to Los Angeles, to Oaxaca. There where nothing stays still, as if anything could, and that nothing, which is a mountain, points to a star's order, and star is a matter of points. Our community nature thus not only expands to all the people within our elective circles or grand collages, but to the very stuff of the universe, the effluvia, the force, or if one prefers a more empty sense from which all things spring, the chora, which is also a core and a chorus and a chorale of atomic dissonance, where dissonance compiles the universe. I began this paragraph with the communal associating the whole with the part, which I take from Will Alexander's Inalienable Recognitions, an essay published by Eohippus Labs in 2009. We often divide the world into one and other, I and you, we and they. Will's vision would never allow such divisions except as mistakes of Western consciousness and the Cartesian view. For Will Alexander, the nature of matter is something that cannot be contained as sterilization by plinth, by manipulated allotment or border. And such a view is seen as core to the Asiatic endogeny and by extension, Africa with all its stunning oral kingdoms. Not only a matter of peoples though, but his inclusion takes in the ice fields, the wildebeest optics, or the spontaneous hexagrammatics of servals. He may call this inclusion the ballaics of the ozone, at the spillage of the sky, which exhales as a burning supraphysical raga. While Alexander points to Breton and Miro, making us lean towards surrealism as a concurrent current to his own vision and practice, yet he is grounded in a wide view of possible science, and his build on the sodium is palpable. Of those grains of sand Blake speaks about, not an impossible wilderness. He may visit a place where neutron semantics transpires, but his own semantics, while blitzing through cosmological wavelengths, are palpable. They speak to you, they speak to me. Early on in Asia, 1995, he writes in the voice of a group of Buddhist monks, a collective voice which hovers in invisibility in a spheroid flecked with scarlet, conducting astral warfare against the Chinese invaders of Tibet. Yet in his infinitely expandable sense of connections, such battlers are any of us who hold up notions of free thinking and free mingling of ideas against forces that would resist such roaming. It is a we that not only resists, but also conducts. And this is from that work where he writes, "So it is that we specify an ink as a diadem that summons its refulgence from splendor, as a substance voided and renounced by sensation. This is the moment, the arcanum as monument, the fervor, the chanting, the sudden appearance as flaw. This is our odyssey." Sometimes I think Will Alexander akin to Charles Baudelaire because of his clear vision of the evils that would limit us, though he does not give in to Baudelaire's ennui, which many of us think is inevitable and perhaps necessary. At other times, I think Will Alexander akin to William Blake, who sees so clearly the burning furnaces of industrialization and post-industrialization that make manacles to imprison us, yet who also sees the possible poetics of conjunction, rebellion, and angelic triumph that is possible for a species that has defied limits for centuries. In a 2013 interview, he says, "To say it succinctly, language is life, and life being motion, what follows is the intuitive understanding that creative language cannot be plotted by contiguous or what I would call verbal architectural planning. For me, it is suffused with explosive electrical motion, wayward, encyclopedic, seismic, alive by means of seeming disorder, which it does not allow for the controlling posture of the author, anchored as he or she is by extrinsic classification. Where classification may leap, as words may do, to calcification, here you have the characteristics of Alexander's poetry, that it embraces the wayward, the explosive, the seismic, the encyclopedic. It remains alive at all points by making use of these nodes that might point to disorder, yet it is only a seeming disorder. Move away to the point where the connection of all waywardness is apparent, where the electrical circuits fire the motion of the planet, of the planets, and all they survey, of all we survey, with a decidedly visionary set of tools for the task. And while there is nothing quite automatic about the processes of such writing, there is immediacy. Alexander invokes the jazz drummer Max Roach in calling for hard work that is to be done. Yet, if one appreciates jazz, the hard work can take place in the instant, in the movement from one note or one chord or one pace to another. We can update to the just published 600 plus page The Combustion Cycle by Alexander from Roof Books, where near the end, he sees all the way down to what is missing and broken and troubling and heartbreaking and unattainable in our world, but affirms not only his mission within such zones, but our mission as well. He affirms our role and sees new creations, new eruptions, new stars in our future, where our is the whole of the expanding universe. This is from that book. I am here to evince none of the above, those endless negatives, nothing of the force of unbalanced notations. I am simply here as a source come to express my concerns, as would a nebula in the throes of its erupting star-forming regions. Will Alexander is the closest we have in our community of poets to a jazz master, the hard-won creator of the instantaneous, the transformer of note to harmonics and disharmonics, to a music we both can't quite handle and can't turn away from. We are here and experience the here. In Will's words, as if each emotional connection were a concentrated blazing, were a focused spark in disarray amidst a mix of vibrational androgynes. Except I think he believes, as I do, that there is no as if about it. Rather, here, among each other, among all the others, through all of history and into the cosmological future, is where we live. We are each the part that invokes the whole. Please welcome Will Alexander.
Thank you for this introduction, Charles. It continues our collaboration, our psychological collaboration that stretches forever and has been quite fertile. I hope for you, but certainly for me, with the adventurous publication of my plays. But I won't talk any further about this, but it's part of the weaving. And I appreciate this tremendously. And what I'm going to do is start off with the poem some years ago from the opening of my first New Directions volume, the Sri Lankan Loxodrome. It's called A Bedouin Art. And the theme of the reading should be centered around water. Water. The first is a poem about a quantum sailor, and it's the Bedouin Art. And repetition as the existence, as condoned in respun vapor, which continues to post-exist as mirages across an arc, as lucid underwater scent. An arc with its compression of oars, with its one simultaneous ascent over and above the simultaneous as movement. Its obliterated form where the body of the captain reappears and disappears, eruptive with schisms and salts, eruptive with cobias, blanquillos, and starfish, extrinsic and solstitial to any forewarned destination, to any leprosy or rupture or fragment. An arc at the same time betrayed and withdrawn through an index of phantoms, like a squall beneath a stunning alabaster tide, invigorated by pre-existing persons within its hull, spawned by runic simum calendry, by fields of gnarled lava, predaceous orange-brown spider crabs feeding in diametrical coldness. The art, now again visible to itself amidst volcanic flamelets, fanning anonymous blades of crushing underwater jade. The wind around its hull, a void of pusillanimous optometry, a shell of scorched bottoms, mechanics exponentially concussive, like a solitary benzene or an earthquake phylum, or a riddled scorpion typhoon. Because its art captained by scaleless ghosts, scripting down their foundations from methane, from a sound with a stinging pottery of nerves, like murmurs from a hatchet well, scribbling maps, inducing subtractive proteins on chemosynthetic shockwaves of vertigo. So in the depths of bioluminescence, a void, a glassy conduit of ore, a propulsive cilia, a whip-like chimera. The captain scripting these events in a geomantic log concerning the brackish flare from his burning central body. A body below creatrix waters, a body hollow below the simulation of the trilobites, so that it constantly exists, a smokeless anti-existence, which seemingly enshrouds a multiple quantity or a glare, much in the form of a stock nucleate food stock, like a summed explosive strife, which is the terra incognita, the fearful archaeology of fate. The ark, failing to illumine its maritime amniotic by means of any purposeful or magic diorthosis, or any of the perplexing tonics of salinity, or by the Gorgonian as former body by persona, be it the pelvic whale or the caudal dolphin, the body of the captain, a blank indeterminate ether, a smoldering solstice phantom, a soma beyond the depth of its former viewing range, superseding the diameter of boron and the arc of the captain, conflagrant as anti-causality, which post-exists disintegration. The captain in possession of colorless Bedouin's blood, complex, burning, igniting light by carbohydrates. Then just as quickly creating mass in a hydrozoic sea by means of insinuous noctiluca inside the fire of diaphanous algae. The captain, as voice of the dinoflagellates, as interior transpercuity, now as translocated ember, as photonic Bedouin archery, with a sudden grasp of stunning neural ranges, electrokinetic and spectral with maturity. He who now thrives without name, floating throughout inverted lightning hills, perhaps his darting appellation is hexagrammide, or a goatfish burin, or a form which takes place within Peruvian gurus, at the level of a subdivided spheroid, yet no longer partaking of the decigram or the canto. In an unknown zone such as the German East Pacific or Dutch Borneo peninsulas, like dark imaginary climates, floating beneath a fragment of broken imaginal isles, drifting beyond the confines of nodes or pharmaceutical calculus, gathering incandescent distance in a zone like Lake Urmia or in the powers of Coco Noor. No longer of the realm of geometrical sirocco's, of a prone and caustic emblematics, the world now fallen into a cryptic bay of moons, connivance extracted from the comma of the Paraguay rivers. Not a gnomic projection, nor a day's submission to funeric engulfments, the captain no longer of an ashram of vectors or typographic geyser in a void. He exists at nervous solitary limit. His former vibrations, obliquitous, vulpine, indigenous to the moisture of flashes, the Bedouin arc, an exploded viral dove, a predaceous anti-fixation, disappearing at the level of the local selenius. Then the sea wasp, the sessile medusas, the hydrozoan jellyfish, like obliterated bells, like the eye in depolarized coronas. Seeing susurrus, seeing fire in the form of entangled isolations, in the arc of a neuron, in the spark of a dark infinity. I'll continue with that. It's called water as a dysphoric medium. A skittish form in sudden arsenic waters, amplified like a smoky siphonophore within a black gestation of strata. The water then burns beneath an androgynous source of lilies, with each of its moons exploded like garish millipedes in resin. Thought becomes an isotope within hydrology, within an inorganic compound, within the power of its youngest sea, where I imagine in its depths the force of stunning manganese trees or a body of crows trapped within a heated polar ceiling. The depths reverse the isobars with their dust counts like lead condemned to a brutish wheat projection. The biopsies, the oxygen meters, the taste of stunned plankton like a concentrated polyp from a tribe of spontaneous stellar confinement. The anatomical, the blank globigerina of debris like darting alchemical thievery or dazed selenium hull or vaporized boreum falling miles and miles to the bottom, flecked at a level beyond carbonized petroleum, beyond that which antedates salt. I'm speaking of energies which ingest the first perfected forms of creation, the primordium of waves, the calligraphy of torment. And so the coelacanths, the vampire fish, the orbits of volcanoes endure. And the timing of the amplitudes, the surges, the gust, like thermal craters which explode and collapse and reabsorb themselves as the fulminant microalgae as a violent insomnial structure, devoid of blood, of instance of birth. The writhing dunes, the dark conduction of saliva, de-energized by emerging, then brought to bear upon fruit of infertilized deltas. We're in a position right now of interesting seeming terminations right now we're passing through, like the old Scylla and Charybdis, we're trying to wade through clashing rocks with the environment. And, the water is our life source. And the suicide tries to continue to propagate itself. We don't know, it's like a time lapse. We don't know if we're already gone or we're just transitioning to another higher state. I tend to fall on the latter dimension of the higher state rather than the terminal state. And that's what language is about, not a terminal condition, but of the present, but a lot higher force that's projected into not a mystical state, but another level of livingness that we find analogous in the indigenous cultures, where there's always a circular activity moving, energy transferring into other planes of itself, higher planes of itself, I should say, not just other planes, but higher planes of itself. So this is the possibility I'm holding out, not as a utopia, but as some kind of, I would say, a language transmuted into a certain kind of a transformation, a transmutation of our energy. But we're trying to get beyond the capital structures. So many works are talked about as part of our terminal mythology that we're all passing through. And we hear details. There's an excellent book that I've just gotten wind of. It's William I. Robinson's work on the global surveillance state. But if you don't have any water, there's nothing to surveil. There's nothing to do surveillance on. So we're talking about something on another level, not to dismiss his analysis, which is excellent, but to get to another plane of conditioning of the mind. And so I think writing is a great way to do this. Poetry is a great way to experiment and move further and further away from any terminal exhalation. And this is hopefully another mode, and hopefully we're seeding another call for existence right now. But I would like to do something here. I guess this is a day for longer poems, but I'll do this smaller one here in the Sri Lankan Loxodrome in the midst of all the longer pieces. This is called Thought as Philosophical Torment. In the mirror of excessive drift, there exist those values which exist within schisms, within error-racked spectrums, which glow by means of vapor above anti-dimensional obstruction. The visage of metrics tuned to a mesmeric lisp, to a rancid field of dice thrown across ethers, across 3 or 4 sierras or voids, so that each sculpting, each prism advances the aboriginal understanding to a macro-positional scalding, which collapses, which takes on the centigrade of absence bound to invisible camaraderie, which means velocity is obscured and resurrected beyond the scope of apositional turquoise, beyond the scope which defies its way of jaundice, by circular language as dragon. The face and the scope of the millipedes no longer condoned with withdrawal, to persecution as flaw or advancement. For instance, the blank theogony of vowels, or the inhomophony of distance like an open vibrational nerve, or the hissing of ruins in a buried nautical port. One thinks of a sublimated mountain illness, contracted as in a reddish form of dysentery, and in each intrinsic nuance, all the symmetries obscured. The maps one comes to know are but boulders which are shattered by spoilage. Therefore, the fragments hung in peninsulas are suspended, and the visage in its demeanor like a de-ingested shrine subsumed in the body as a rudderless coherence. And we are in times seemingly in this rudderless era, drifting throughout the cosmos. You know, you hear some fragments from science about us passing through seeded by dust from the cosmos, which is telling me that we are not a segregated species. And I think the last stool, the what do you call it? The Anthropocene has been an absolute misnomer. And we are not segregated. It's like the old maps or the old charts that there was a Swedish person who drew up at the beginning of during the beginning of the era, where all the species were put into separate boxes, including parts of humanity. And we've been suffering from that ever since. That's a 1750 date, I think. Linnaeus, you know, putting everything into categories and higher, lower, this or that. We're coming from the same particle, not in an organic sense, not in a mystical sense, but in I'd say a mystical sense, it root, but a dynamic sense is a good way of putting it. And you can't live without one thing or taking one thing out and put another thing in, or eliminating one thing. And this is like racial segregation. You can't cut off the reality of the whole. And we're talking about the whole here, not the part. And I think it's the trauma of the era, going through the whole and putting the whole together and evolving beyond the part. So in that sense, I want to continue to read. And the theme is kind of like on water. And I'll do a smaller portion here of the title piece of the Sri Lankan Loxodrome. And we're not going to try to read the whole poem. I'm going to do a few pages, and we'll go into our closing reading here for the combustion cycle. But this is a title piece about a lone Sri Lankan sailor, you know, battling the elements. I wouldn't say battling the elements, of finding his way through the elements in the Indian Ocean. And I have a quote here from the great Sheikh Anta Diop, transmitting Egyptian cultural values in the domain of writing and navigation. And this is, for me, navigation. Because, by the way, the first navigators really to really cross across the oceans to populate its energies in Southern America, I'm talking about Mexico, were like the Egyptians. And we know this from Ivan Van Sertima, where the certain formations were identical to the sailors in Egypt at Tanis, and that migrated over into the Americas, as we call them now, the Olmecs. But enough talk. Here's the poem, a few pages. The sailor says, as to whether I exist square to the 9 originations of the carnal spirit body, of its clarifying poison or its wheat, does not condemn me or destroy my fate as Loxodrome. Perhaps I am a mix of Yemenis or Omani configuration, possessing a murderous carpentry or a salubrious or insalubrious flexity, at the code which dissonant germs must invigorate, bronchial delay, or answer its breathing by dialectical probation. It is as if such each of my lives is concluded with inflationary drift, with deltas, with models of themselves, involving perhaps 4 or 10 dimensions, more stunning than the ambit of an ibis, transcending its folios and trance. I exist not as a technical brutality, nor as a monotheistic transcription, or as a terse, incapable pilot splitting his axis on rocks. But the mind in its horrific degree completely incapable of limits, incapable of forming zones of bondage by which my tertiary compass responds to his hosannas. I have burned in previous lives as one single body, as foiled idyllic monoran, given over to the permanent ache of isolation, to the permanent ecclesiastical gaze of a brackish melancholia, instinctively kept alive by prolonged engagement with a succubus, her names Pyrexia, Corina, Mamaloe, that I have been able to divide, to re-engender my thirst according to a sovereign maritime picture. I have never been able to see my own breathing or begin to awe myself within a network of narcotic iridescence. My blood ignites and disperses before the sun and after feeding, contained in itself by crepuscular magenta, by origins of Babylonian iridescence, by a diamond-streaked fuchsia, sometimes dazzling, sometimes a curious sleet in the eye. At these moments, I felt like an epileptic Maharaja as a salt-burned incarnation, as satrap, as bey, as pasha, nauseous, figmental, somehow plagued with corrosives. I, as Loxodrome, whose commission is to depoison sea snakes, to somehow bottle their arteries in clouds, all my actions being noctambulous and wary. My command to capture them is beasts, whose color is arlant and xanthic. My daybook filled with diacritical vegetation, and each dissimilar compound that I touch takes on a treasonous reputation, part fatigue, part vertigo of darkness. And I can only chart famine. I can only look into the waters and meander by means of interior connivance, by blackening the mind, by absorbing the salt from its incestuous pulleys. I exist by default, my co-members vacant, and here I am by turns nacreous, ferric, intangible, and always the unevident escapes from my voice and spins with oracular concealment. Yet during these intervals of the voice, a certain smell begins to brew by postpositional acid, which blows from the storms of pre-Columbian gerbils, a den of gerbils, screaming as fulvescent monsters, burning away their powers by assault, by negative demarcations. Therefore, I deepen my color like a voice from necrotic Amsterdams without register, as if my body has been dispersed through draconian misnomer. Because there are times when winds ignite, when anonymous co-sailors drown in the depths, never telling myself to densely bewail their figments, or day after day imbibe on the cholera of defeat. Each of my symptoms remains as abstract carking, remains nothing more than insurrection, as concealment, as ghostly fruit from noxious lightning tree. As though my cells now waft, as though infinity now spins from itself and begins at arcane remove to create itself over and over again, from transacted explosion to transaction explosion, as a recension with its vertigo, a vulturous Nile, a turbulence of cyclones related to the bliss of a powerful anti-dogma, or to a misquoted hut, or to a shelter under comments. I change my existence every other fortnight. I sleep only to renew my substance with the utterance of the void, as though scattered by omniscient protrusions, as a blank Sumerian marvel, as a baneful specimen, or jaguar up on the sea, probed for my beliefs concerning an eclectic palingenesis. That is a fragment. I won't go any further on that poem. But the next piece, and I don't know how much time I have left. I don't want to go too much longer. Okay, we have poem from the Combustion Cycle I'll read from, since it's brand new. It's the third poem in the third part of the set, and it's the voice of another lone being. As I'm alone, I write about aloneness many times, all the time. The aloneness of the sailor is, I'm going to transition to the aloneness of Shudra, an untouchable in India. And the voices of the untouchable is speaking throughout this particular poem. It's about the Ganges, which is about the water in the cleansing of the Ganges. And the untouchable is attempting to be cleansed by a psychic Ganges. And this is the voice that erupts. And I'm going to read a portion because it's over 100 I'd say around 120 pages, the poem itself. But we're going to start here is with the speaking of the voice of the untouchable. I've come to these waters as Shudra, as hallucinated Lama, as spellbinding diktat. In this regard, I'm not a Mahatma nor a spurious intrusion singing in mystical parlando. Me, I'm an old Dravidian from Goa, spectral, velvet, discussing motions concussive with sand, discussing the body as a Wernicke's riddle, or a poem sourced by cholera, or formations tense with blue rotational acids. Perhaps I'm not more than a ghost or a villainous discovery or a gainless instigation based on a set of rivalries with absence. Perhaps I've come to these waters to craft my own tremendums, to walk outside noumenon, to blur my trans identity through culture. Perhaps this is how blood works, how audition reacts and stages itself through reactive physical conflagrations. Here I am to simply defoil myself or to ignite my force by regressive combining. As I react and speak as I react, I've come to hover at the gats, the color of a psychic kashi, sometimes sable and liquid, at other times sulfurino and volcanic. As I respond through parallel persona, there is Benares and Varanasi and Kashi once again, as if synergies were overactive with agua. As Buddhist, as Dravidian sprung from Goa, there is English voice mixed with Kannada Hindu agua, plunged in the depths, then exploding its unequal power as in the purity of ravens, and I see boats burn beneath an unstable sun. Gats waver as strange proportional Richters, as ciphered monsoon epics, as blank emission misfocused. And so the Maharaja's walls take on a cunning electrical rate, as collapsing body self-moored to an unsteady balance. I am different. I take no offering of jive flowers or make as my form philosophical unraveling to evince a kind of portion forced from the gullet as mountainous prayer. Perhaps firewood on gats, perhaps corpses piled as conflagration in odd inadia. And perhaps my heresy of claim is more than entranced moaning, more than something beyond intransigent chakras. For instance, my psyche swims through neglected altar currents, as if I'd stumbled on a feast of vermin on infested sugar hamlets. And for those who declare themselves through samsara, I've risen to no more than the status of a goral or a pangar, or what at best I'll live a million times and never subsist as a purposeful bahana. I've never sat in posture chewing on chana or an invaded dharmasala, speaking quietly to myself through emulated frenzy. When letters burn, when rocks fly from the heavens, they are signs of bats and thistles, their kinetics intrinsically stung by solar incandescence. These being kinetics between Varuna and the Asi, as if I were speaking of a liminal Varanasi, felled and brought to life again by the great form of Sura. From solar form as shard, as cosmic spiral, as situational treatise, as looking glass spawned from complexification and sulfur. Therefore, listening to suns as scorching indigo and silver, what I'm able to do is to translate, is to merge samsara with gat after gat, yet all the while barred from the crypto-Brahmanical. But to know the very summoning of phenomena in the Ganges reacts as luminescence through nothingness, through a spell of transverse murmurs calling, taking away the purest patterns of breathing, being colorless amethyst, and which emboldens itself through rotational blinding. Errors are seemingly embodied and drained, yet what has always concurred is the body as wooden abandonment, as exhausted coronation, as sensate stained through providential inversion. So if I pick out points in time, it creates no ultimate significance. And if such inscrutable date, a certain sari was stolen, if peculiar yaks were transmogrified, life could build as no other outcome, being nothing in itself, being energy randomly exchanged, as say, tsunamis in London. So nothing would burn at that hour. Therefore, the listless feuds, the pointless tiger cats prowling, are lit by a carved and tattooed lightning. These are fires which create themselves as riddles, imposed and superimposed, so that in the shape of the being, no structure exists. No animal can live and be brought back from thinking. If vultures crawl and exhibit no response, I call them naked, fraught with competitive cremations. There must exist this flicker of understanding within the fields which are considered transmigrations. Much in the manner of the torment of owls or hornets which gather affliction and then revert in themselves to a scorched or empty preludial. This is how hawks grow empty of their optimums, of their twist, of the writhing nature in their bones. At times I take sport by rivaling certain bodies immobilized on a curiously saddled sheep, or taking codes from Mongolian ponies, transposing in my sleep sudden eras of waking. Now that I contest my own substance as law, of that I've reached an effortless fissure that thoughts from certain gods can't bury, because I've lost my thirst for the heralded soma, or for the image of myself that nothingness can transpire. Perhaps the rat's condone me as vapor, or as a scent which kindles venoms or encircles itself with envy, as if I'd tangled myself with sounds, with unsuspected clauses, with rifts in the notes of cyclones. Okay, thank you. I don't want to go too long, but it's the first time I've read this work. You know, when I do work, it's weird. I don't kind of look at the work after I've written it. And it's the same with the combustion cycle. In fact, I've been able to write part of a new book already. I'm working on some other essays, and I've been able to finish a longer piece 2 days ago. And so what it does, it keeps my mind active and open for new creation all the time, to memorize and bring up the old. First of all, my language kind of doesn't allow this kind of simple rote. So it gives me the ironic blessing of not being able to fall back on old work and begin to open onto new vistas all the time without feeling exhausted. Like circular breathing. By the way, I had the experience of seeing Sonny Rollins live, and I saw Roland Kirk live. The circular breathing, and it was effortless, keeping motion going. And that's what, so water is that. If you keep it moving, it stays fresh. If it stagnates, like a human being, you stagnate in one position in life, you're over. So in other words, for me, life is always motion, and it should be like that for everyone, not ideologically, but as a natural state that the cosmos gives to us, that we're part of. So I want to emphasize that activity of kinetics and motion and swirling all the time in language, not as some kind of superficial anecdote, but an experience that one feels as one writes. So maybe this is, I don't know how far we have in time, but I don't want to go further. But let's continue forward for reader.
I love the way that the combustion cycle builds off of the Loxodrome, the Sri Lankan Loxodrome, and there's a lot of relationship there, but it seems new territory too. I started making lists while you were reading, making a list of elements that were mentioned, a list of geographical features, a list of bodily kinds of things, a list of mathematic things, a list of animal things. And after I had about 20 or 30 words in each of these lists, I started realizing, well, you can't do it that way because there's a constant intermixing of lists and categories. And so if you were going to make a map of your work, it would be very fluid. It have to be very fluid. And I love that about it. I love that sense that it keeps me reaching for connections.
That's what I do in myself. It's like writing is a meditation, for me to open up, to try to clear the detritus of being what I think I am, what I've been told I think I am. And that's a lifelong process. That's not you can't do that in one poem, but you do it through a state of mind. So in that sense, writing is a meditation for me all the time. I need to do it. Like Bud Powell says, I need to play the piano every day. So, this is the same thing for me with the writing. I'm not thinking in terms of literature, but I'm thinking in terms of existential reality, meditation, eruption, and rising to another state of awareness of the mystery that we are all entangled in.
You're getting a lot of thank yous in the chats for all this work you're doing. I wanted to ask Tenny, usually, or sometimes we've developed this thing where whoever introduces the person, Tenny and me, the other one maybe makes a comment at the end. So
yeah, thank you, Joseph. Thanks so much. It was absolutely fantastic, and thanks for honoring us with the reading premiere of a work. That's terrific. And when you were talking about the constant transformation as one of the crucial things in your work, I was thinking about the connection to surrealism, and the painter that it reminds me most is the Chilean surrealist Mata, where the perspective is so unstable, and you think something's receding into the background, but it's actually looming into the foreground, or doing the reverse. And so things, go back and emerge as other things, but you don't know whether it's receding or looming forward. And that sense of a kind of vibrant and unpredictable transformative motion feels a lot like what you read to me. And then when you were talking about poetics, not the Scylla and Charybdis, but not of extinction, but of transformation. I'm reminded also of this a little thing from Kenneth Burke that I love, where he talks about the incantatory function of the imagery. And he says that is the invitation to make ourselves over in the image of the imagery. And I feel that your work is offering that kind of invitation to us at virtually every moment. So thanks so much.
Thank you for the commentary. Thank you.
I don't know if anybody else wanted to say anything out loud, or if not, we usually, this whole thing takes an hour and we have maybe 5 or 6 minutes left for that. I just hope we can do it again too. I wonder, do you have a piano during this time of quarantine?
I don't. I have to simulate motions, do exercises with my fingers, and imagine the sound when I'm doing that. But when I sit down to a piano, I just let my fingers work.
Yeah.
I've been inspired by Lowell Davidson, the pianist that Ornette Coleman discovered. In fact, I'm hopefully at some point in the future, I did have a lucrative, I would say, fertile conversation with Bobby Bradford. We may be doing something again, as an exercise, and it's thrilling, to work with somebody with that intuition, on his plane of consciousness. But I'm looking for all motions I'm always playing an instrument when I write, because all the arts translate into other arts for me, like when I write an essay and I do a drawing, it's the same feeling as when I write a poem, or it's a similar feeling when I write a poem or I strike a note on an instrument. It's the situation where we've been taught to divide everything up, to give it kind of a solidity, which has a difficult translation process. But for me, the translation process is like water. It flows, and it goes into bays and inlets and lagoons and all the above, as well as larger ocean masses, like the Atlantic or the Pacific, or anywhere that you find it in the cosmos. In fact, during this pandemic, we've been alerted, at least I've been alerted to the waters under the earth. There's supposed to be 2 large bodies of water under the earth. So at one point I was thrilled by the idea that water came from comets, but it seems like these waters have built up mysteriously under this earth as well as others. Hence the attempt to go to, I'm thinking of the moons that have is it Enceladus? I'm thinking of one of the moons of Saturn. The whole idea of underground oceans and the creatures that exist in those areas, So in other words, we're dealing with a whole grammatical, I could say, balance of the cosmos, even though it seems bizarre on the surface and distant, but it feels at the same time very concentrated and very open to the possible mind that we can evolve to as things go. So in that sense, the pandemic has been in that sense only, it's been an opening for some of us on this planet to begin to explore our own internal states and let the imagination begin to work its way via language into these other locales of consciousness.
Yeah. One of the things I think of, part of this is your connection, you're likening what you do to jazz improvisation and painting and everything. That you remind me at every moment that poetry, that knowledge, that understanding, it's not a thing, it is an action. It is something we make happen or happens with us. Yeah.
It's a kinetic. It's a kinetic experience. It's a living experience where you're continuously washing all the clearing out the ducts, clearing out the obstructions. Coltrane once said it's just like cleaning the mirror all the time. You have to clean the mirror all the time. So, you cleaning the mirror of consciousness all the time. And living is continuous work. It's not like you retire from living. You don't retire, you retire from a company, but you don't retire from living. And so the mind should be working from the nursery school all the way out, to the beginning. If you have that opportunity to start the mind at say 4 or 5 years old, maybe we will have that opportunity as a species to begin to work at that level at some point. But under the conditions we are now, we're so obstructed with governments and regulations and this and that and that and this. that it blocks the people who are trying to obstruct the flow of information and the flow of energy. They become self-obstructed in the process. And so the blind are leading the blind at this point. So we want the poets have a way of moving through hurdles like the way air blows. Mm. Or as I said today, the way the water moves. It has. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, Andrew Levi in the chat just says, and Cocteau says, walk through the mirror. So not only
just walk through, just go through things. It's like you don't have obstruction. That's an illusion that you have all these obstructions, and they're only temporary because like laws are really temporary. Mm-hmm. The law under the French, or the law under the French colonials, like the colonial law that obstructed the great poet from Africa, Jean-Joseph Rabbi Ravello, and kept him from going to Paris to be what I consider to be the next Lorca. Mm-hmm. But instead, he was stuck in Madagascar, where he exterminated himself from disappointment. But we won't go into that sidebar. Although I have a book coming out in the end of this year, as I mentioned yesterday to another audience. It's called Refractive Africa, and it's coming out from New Directions in the fall. And simultaneously, at the beginning of 2022, it's one that's coming out from a New Granta imprint in London. And it's about the organic nature of the African continent, not from an ideological point of view, but from an organic necessitous point of view. Because without, there's one symbol right in the center of the work. It's called, the pillar poem is called the Congo, and one on one side is to Rabbi Ravello, and the opening poem is to Amos Tutuola. We're talking about refractive Africa, the different sides of Africa, the English, the French, and all the other languages that we in the West don't have any kind of grasp of in terms of any kind of organic. So I mentioned all these things in the section on the Congo, but enough of that, because everything is strung together. The combustion cycle, this book, and there are other things to talk about, but I don't want to go on too long. But
okay,
yeah.
Well, on behalf of everybody involved with Enclave, thank you. And
thank you for inviting me.
And I hope we get to do it again.
Let's do it. Let's go for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Will.